have Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and he is going to be talking through the use of FOIA requests and subpoenas as part of investigating the Pentagon event.
I'm the litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. I'm a public interest lawyer, 32 years experience representing plaintiffs in whistleblower protection cases, government oversight matters, Freedom of Information Act litigation, environmental protection, and generally other public interest litigation. I've been involved in 9/11 investigation for 15 years or more, 10 years with the Lawyers Committee. As you know from Barbara's presentation yesterday, the Lawyers Committee is a nonprofit. Our mission is transparency and accountability regarding the matters of 9/11, including what happened at the Pentagon. Now, the Lawyers Committee has been scrupulous to this point in not taking a position on a preferred theory for explaining what happened at the Pentagon, so we don't endorse or disagree with any of the presenters. Today, we're going to listen carefully to the evidence, evaluate it, and we're going to evaluate it with something very important in mind, given what we heard yesterday from Senator Johnson and the congressman, which I found very significant for the movement. And that is, we're going to listen not to so much determine who we agree with or disagree with, but because the evidence regarding what happened at the Pentagon has not been fully disclosed. There's still a lot of it being concealed by the government. It's not really possible to come up with a definitive, comprehensive theory from the Lawyers Committee's point of view until more of that evidence gets released. So as we listen to the presenters today, we're going to listen not just to see what points we might agree with or disagree with, but we're listening for indications of where our future investigation may go and should go using the Freedom of Information Act, using subpoenas. We'll talk about how subpoenas might be used in a moment. And so we're looking for essentially hints to the roadmap for completing this investigation. We hope to have opportunities of working with Congress. Certainly yesterday was encouraging in that regard. And so as you listen to the presenters, sort of listen as I do as a teacher. I taught mathematics for 10 years. I look for disagreements and for mistakes, not in terms of something to be criticized or as a negative. I look at those events as opportunities to learn. And I think the points of disagreement of the speakers today are really important for us to focus on because they're going to point us in directions where our investigation needs to go to resolve these ongoing disputes. And so it's actually the differences in these presentations that may be good roadmaps for our future investigation. So I'm going to try to give you an outline of a roadmap to investigate the Pentagon going forward. There are three major components to that roadmap: logic, law, and factual evidence. And I'm going to focus on the first two. And the factual evidence you're going to hear from the presenters to follow. So the first question you might ask is, 24 years later, why do we still need to investigate the Pentagon? I've sort of answered that already, and you'll hear from the speakers a lot of details for why that is still necessary. The big picture is key evidence is still being concealed. We have some FOIA requests pending. I'll talk about those briefly in a moment. And a lot of key evidence is still being concealed. The second reason we need further investigation is that we have competing theories based on good faith professional evaluations of the evidence, and to get closure on those areas of disagreement, we need to get the rest of that evidence. The third reason is there continue to be significant red flags regarding what happened at the Pentagon based on what has been revealed. Those include evidence of explosions, ambiguous videos that have been released, the yet to be explained failure of the air defenses, the very limited information on plane parts and the identity of the plane parts in the planes, the unusual flight pattern evidence, and differences in eyewitness accounts. So there's plenty of reason to still be looking at the Pentagon as an area of further investigation. And I add, not the least of which is the perpetrators, or at least significant portions of the perpetrators, are still at large and have not been held accountable. And lastly, and to me, one of the most significant factors for continuing this work is that the victims of the Pentagon attacks, their families still have a need to know and a right to know the full truth. Now, I have represented the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry and certain legal actions. We talked about some of those in other events, but a couple of those do cover the Pentagon, and that may not be fully understood by some in the audience. We do have a FOIA lawsuit pending in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., and we did ask for the FBI's major bombings cases files. Some of you may not know that the Pentagon 9/11 attacks, along with the Trade Center attacks, are included by the FBI in what they call their major bombings cases. And you might wonder why the FBI would include the 9/11 attacks in a file called major bombings when they don't admit to any explosives being used. And we're trying to get to the bottom of that. But the bottom line is that is what they called their files. So they decided to archive a large portion of their files on their major bombings cases. David Cole, a longtime 9/11 investigator, FOIA researcher that I've worked with and represented, brought to our attention the fact that the FBI was going to archive all these records. So we asked the FBI through a FOIA request to give us a copy of all their major bombings cases related to the Pentagon and to the Trade Center. And their first response was, it'll cost you several $1,000s. Our response back was, we'll pay it. And their response back then was, oh, sorry, we can't give you any of these records because they are still law enforcement confidential. There's still a investigation or prosecution or legal action that is pending regarding 9/11 that prevents us from releasing these files, even though they told the National Archives they didn't need those files anymore for their work. So that was an interesting contradiction. So we're suing them to produce those records. The district court has directed the FBI to review all those records for exemptions, including the law enforcement exemption. That process has been ongoing for several months now and is continuing. Thus far, the FBI claims every one of these many thousands of pages of records and photographs are exempt from disclosure because of the law enforcement exemption, but they won't tell us what proceeding they're relying on to say that there's still an active investigation or prosecution. We suspect it's the prosecution of the alleged 9/11 conspirators that's been going on for years and years. Folks are still in custody. There was some recent announcements of plea deals in those cases of the Guantanamo defendants. But it appears those plea deals have been rejected eventually by a higher court. So that case is still going on, but they won't tell us whether that's what they're relying on or not. And this evidence is more than 20 years old now, so it's not very clear why there would be a need for continued secrecy. So we're continuing to litigate that. The second major legal action the Lawyers Committee engaged in to try to get the Pentagon evidence was our lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice regarding the 9/11 Review Commission. Barbara mentioned that briefly. This was not the original commission. It was a later 2014-2015 era mandate from Congress that many folks still don't know about, which required the FBI to look at all 9/11 evidence. That should have included all the Pentagon evidence. What we got, as Barbara mentioned, was a cover-up from the new commission. They didn't really look at the new evidence at all. So we did bring a lawsuit seeking to compel the FBI to do what Congress mandated. That lawsuit did not succeed, not because we were wrong about the evidence that was ignored, but because the district court and the Court of Appeals decided that the plaintiffs, including first responders, 9/11 family members, and nonprofits, such as the Lawyers Committee, don't have legal standing to compel that compliance. There was also a finding that Congress only put the requirement for this evidence to be reviewed in legislative history and not in the statute. That, by the way, is a problem Congress could fix at any time fairly readily by a one-page amendment to the legislation. So if we do get support from Congress, this is an area we should talk about. So those efforts have not solved the problem. We still need to get that additional information. Now, Jean Laratanda, who's one of the organizers here, and Sandra Jelmy have, with my assistance, pursued a FOIA request and are contemplating a FOIA lawsuit for the Pentagon videos. When Jean first asked for the Pentagon evidence, they indicated that there were some videos that existed, but they would have to edit them, and it would cost some money to get the records released. We did a new FOIA, which basically said, you've identified these 100 videos. We would like you to produce all of them in their entirety. At which point they said it would cost $28,000 to produce them, even though they could be put on DVDs or a hard drive, and it would take about 77 months before they could complete the response. So we're still, Sandra and Jean and I are still strategizing on how to proceed on that case. You'll hear more about that hopefully shortly. So we also did, as most of you know, a petition to the U.S. Attorney in New York through the Lawyers Committee with a lot of support from you, and asked for a grand jury to look at all the evidence on 9/11 that was focused on the Trade Center. But inevitably, once the thread starts to be pulled by a grand jury, that inquiry would lead to the Pentagon and Shanksville as well. That process is ongoing to try to get a grand jury. We'll keep you more updated on that. Other folks have sought Pentagon records. David Cole, I mentioned, is one who's done some FOIA requests. There was a lawsuit earlier that many of you know about on behalf of April Gallup, one of the victims. That lawsuit did not succeed. And there has been a book written by Elias Davidson that talks about some aspects of the Pentagon evidence, including the limited evidence of the plane parts and identity of the planes, which is a significant issue for this ongoing investigation. So the details, some of the details of what we do know, you'll be getting from the speakers, but as you listen to them, also listen with an eye towards what we don't know and how that might guide our future Freedom of Information requests. I'm prepared, and the Lawyers Committee is prepared to do additional FOIA requests. So if you do have recommendations for the Pentagon, for what evidence you might want to get through FOIA, send it to us. We're crafting that new FOIA campaign now, and it will be proceeding shortly. The FOIA continues to be a valuable tool. Some people may get discouraged for reasons, a couple of which I mentioned: the delay it takes, the cost, the legal defenses that the agencies come up with. But still, some of our FOIA litigation has been successful. We had a partially successful lawsuit for David Cole recently, which I represented David in with support from the Lawyers Committee. We had thousands of pages of documents released regarding the building performance study by FEMA regarding the Trade Center. And David has, over the years, gotten thousands and thousands of pages of 9/11 records released. And David Cole's effort should be appreciated and recognized in that regard. He continues to seek Pentagon records, and I've committed to help him in future litigation to do that. So obvious targets for FOIA requests, without getting into all the details, which I think we'll get more from the speakers on, the videos at the Pentagon, the videos near the Pentagon, satellite photos and video on the day of 9/11. These are obvious targets. The records regarding the wreckage from the planes, the identity of the planes and their parts. There's also some ongoing issues regarding identity of the hijackers. And that's actually an example of a productive FOIA request. My former colleague, David Meiswinkle, who was with the Lawyers Committee, did a Pennsylvania records request similar to the FOIA on the Shanksville incident, and that was negotiated successfully. I helped David actually review a lot of the records at the coroner's office. And to make a long story short, one of those records indicated that the FBI told the coroner not to request death certificates for the hijackers because they might be using assumed identities. That was the FBI saying that. Subpoenas are another key component of this roadmap for investigating the Pentagon. You might wonder why we're talking about subpoenas being a citizens organization. Well, there are 4 ways subpoenas could come into play here. One is, if we do get a congressional investigation, Congress has broad subpoena power, and all they need is a legitimate legislative purpose, which would be abundant on 9/11, and they can subpoena records. A new presidential commission could do so. A grand jury has broad subpoena power. And yes, even citizens can, in an appropriate civil lawsuit. What we need to do is bring a civil lawsuit that gets past a motion to dismiss on the procedural defenses like standing. Some of you may not know, a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. District Court in New York denied the Saudis' motion to dismiss in the 9/11 families lawsuit against the Saudis. That case is now going to go to discovery and trial, and so those folks should have subpoena power. So there is one additional strategy for investigating the Pentagon. It's somewhat non-traditional, although it's traditional for my colleagues and I who represent whistleblowers, and that is to develop a program to encourage whistleblowers to come forward and to support them if they do come forward. You heard from some whistleblowers over the last couple of days. So Congress could provide a forum for whistleblower testimony. Whistleblowers could testify to Congress, including on some matters that they may not be allowed to release publicly. And as some of you know from my work on the 28 pages, there is a body of law that protects Congress people. It's called the Speech or Debate Clause, and the case law interpreting it. So a Congress member who got something secret from a whistleblower as part of their official inquiry could actually disclose it, like the Pentagon Papers were disclosed years ago, and they're protected from prosecution for doing so. The Congress members are by the Speech or Debate Clause. So keep in mind, whistleblowers are still a valuable ally. So to get close to the conclusion of my presentation, I want to suggest for how the truth movement should proceed as we listen to these presentations today. Think of them as opportunities to learn. Think of the areas of disagreement as not something to be criticized, but to embrace as an opportunity to guide our investigation. Each of the speakers is doing what they can to put the limited evidence available into a coherent theory. So treat them with respect. They're united in the search for truth, and we don't have to all have a consensus on the details to be united in that search for truth. The reason we still have those competing theories isn't any deficiency on the part of the theorists. It's because the government continues to conceal key material evidence that can help us reach a consensus. So for that reason, we expect to continue our investigation using FOIA, using subpoena power. So I thank all of you for attending. Thanks to the members of Congress that were so inspiring yesterday. Thanks to Redacted for hosting this event and supporting us. This ends my presentation, and thank you all for your attention.